But this took place in a photographic studio. There was a well-known photographer named Nadar who had just moved out of his studio that happened to be on this major boulevard, and he was friends with these young artists. So he lent them a space. You can actually see it right here. That's what the actual building looked like. He lent them a space, and these young group of artists set up an exhibition. It had about 165 works from 33 different artists in the first exhibition. And also very different for the time period is that the way the works were hung was that they were all hung kind of on the same level, and it was done largely by alphabetical order. And I'll explain the significance of that in just a moment also. And this is this is a recreation of what they think it looked like. So this exhibition ran from April 15th until May 15th, about a month, which is very common for the salons at the time period. It opened, though, 2 weeks before the official Paris Salon. And so it was really set up to be really as competition and meant to be set up against the official salon. It attracted about 3,500 people, which maybe sounds like a big deal, but this is in comparison to the 450,000 that went to the official salon. And this is an actual painting that was shown at and of the official salon of 1874. So the official salon was a well-established event that usually took place every year, sometimes every 2 years, in Paris. And it was set up, it was official, it was run by the government. And up until this point, it was really the only way in which, if you were an artist, how you could have your art seen. It was really the only way you could promote your art or have it seen, or it really being accepted as an actual work of art. This is the painting, one of the paintings that won the highest awards in 1874. And it looks quite a bit different from Impressionism, I would say. This is a painting by an artist named Jean-Léon Gérôme. It's based in a historical subject matter. It's actually set in the Palace of Versailles. It has, these figures dressed in elaborate, very traditional, realistic-looking costumes. You've got a depiction where it really looks like it's actual three-dimensional space. You've got figures that look three-dimensional and rounded. So that was the style of the time period. This won the highest awards at the French Salon of 1874. And this was part of the French Royal Academy. So the French Royal Academy had been founded originally in 1648 under Louis XIV, who's known as the Sun King. And this was established very much to create a system of training for artists and also as a platform to exhibit their work. But really the Academy also, Louis XIV wanted there to be an official French style, and he wanted all of the art to be reflective of his desires and how he wanted to promote his country. So this was really set up to train artists and to give them that platform, but also to create a national style. This is just a little picture of him, Louis XIV as the patron of fine arts. So the French Royal Academy set up all of these rules. Within it, you also had a very, very rigid training system. So artists started off and they were trained by other academicians, and they were trained to study works of Greek and Roman art or Renaissance works of art. It was very, very, very rigorous training. And then if you passed each level succinctly, you eventually got the opportunity. This is a picture of the Academy. So this is just the Academy of Beaux-Arts. It's just the school that you went to. Highly, highly emphasized studying from the human form, trying to create a very realistic approach to painting. In addition to that, once you went through all of the different levels of training, usually took about 4 years or so, you would get the opportunity to submit works of art to the official salon. And the official salon began in 1667. At the time, as I mentioned, this was the only way that you could see art in France. This is before there are art museums. It's before art galleries. There's not dealers or little galleries down the road. So if your art did not get accepted to the annual Salon, your art wasn't going to be seen, and therefore nobody was going to buy your works of art. So this really was an important event. It was highly, highly visited. It was really, the entire public was permitted to come. They were encouraged to come. Louis XIV wanted the people to be cultured and aware of art. So this was a huge event. Hundreds of thousands of people came over about the 4 weeks. But it really did have a monopoly on the patronage, because this exhibition was really how people knew what art was and was their only opportunity to see it. And of course, as you can imagine, there was a jury that you had to submit to. And those jury members had been members of the Academy who had done all of the training of the artists. So they were looking for and promoting a very specific style. So if you submitted your works of art and they got refused, like I said, your art is not going to be seen. You've just wasted a year of your life. You're not going to make any money. So it makes sense that as an artist, you're going to kind of abide by those rules and restrictions. So it was really very structured, very, it was a little bit of a regime, I would say. And these are just a few pictures of it. If you kind of notice, I mentioned that there was a big deal about how the Impressionists hung their works of art, because this is traditionally how the works were hung. It's known as salon-style hanging, and basically all the works are really grouped together and kind of stacked from the floor to the ceiling. So innately, once you walked in, much of the public was not terribly knowledgeable about art history, but you could kind of understand immediately when you walked in if your painting was way up at the ceiling, which is called being skied, it wasn't necessarily considered one of the best works. Or if it was way down on the floor level, where it was getting scuffed by umbrellas and shoes, probably wasn't the best. What you wanted was to be on the line, which, there we go. Actually, that's not going to work. I'll use this. But works that are on the line are, as you would imagine, the ones that you can see easiest. So, works right around in that area. Some of the bigger works, if they were a little bit higher, was fine. But that was just the systematic aspect. This is just another salon from 1737. This is from 1824 with the awards and the medals being given out. But the salons were really under the authority of the Academy, which was run by the government. As I mentioned, it was very much open to the public. The public was very much encouraged to come. But there was also this real strict hierarchy as well. And within the hierarchy, this was the works that were considered the most prestigious. At the very bottom are still life paintings, which are largely paintings of inanimate objects. Landscape was also considered really not very prestigious. So you've got just scenes that are, it was considered to be just mimicking looking out at the world and just copying nature. The works that, of course, were much more prestigious are these large-scale history paintings that are actually telling a narrative, telling a story. So there was a lot of rules and restrictions innately in the Academy, and they promoted a very distinct style of art. They wanted works, as I mentioned, that we saw in the Gérôme painting. They wanted works that looked realistic, that had accurate anatomy, usually having kind of a serious subject matter to it or a moralistic subject matter to it, or patriotic. They wanted the figures to look like they were in a realistic space and highly, highly finished. So if any of these paintings, if you were to look at them, in a museum up close, you can't make out any brush stroke at all. It looks completely precisely painted with a layer of glaze over it. So there was just a real distinct style. This is actually a very good example of academic art. And academic art is the art that was accepted by the Academy. So very, very complex rules, realistically rendered. You've got the rounded forms, whatnot. However, gradually people were starting to get a little bored of this. And as you can imagine, if every artist is being encouraged to copy what had been done in the past, it gets a little repetitive. And I love this. This is from 1867, because much of what was encouraged was looking at these historical references, so looking back to ancient Greek and Roman cultures. And here you have this very contemporary-looking woman dressed in the fashion of the day. And she's basically snubbing this soldier who's dressed in a traditional kind of Roman outfit. And instead, it's a little bit hard to make out, but there's a gentleman that's in a top hat that she's going towards. So it was this reflection of the fact that the people, the public, were kind of getting bored of the same old thing, this repetition of looking back to the past. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that modern world, the modern Paris, was really changing. This is really at the height of what's considered modernism. We're talking about 1860s. This is shortly after the Industrial Revolution. It's after photography has been invented. And there was a lot of changes that were happening. Paris was getting modernized. And there were a lot of people that wanted to document that. And one figure that's really rather important to this is a man named Baudelaire, who was a French poet and art critic. But he actually he coins a term known as modernity, which in his definition of it, it was trying to capture the fleeting and the ephemeral moments of modern life. Because at the time period, there was all types of new construction going on, there was new building materials, and so Paris, the way Paris looked, was consistently changing on a daily basis. And Baudelaire emphasized this idea that it was beautiful, the changes were beautiful, that modern materials could be beautiful, that you didn't have to look at the same things. And he also just encouraged the importance of documenting modern life. And so he became a really big influence on a lot of different artists. One of them being Edward Manet. And Edward Manet, the artist, becomes very, very good friends with Charles Baudelaire and really becomes a follower of him. He's also an interesting transitional figure. He is considered to be the first painter of modern life, and he fits in as a sort of transitional figure. This is a pet peeve of mine. You will often see Manet with the A listed as an impressionist. It gets confusing because he does paint in a little bit of an impressionist style, but he never exhibits with them. He actually refused 100% to exhibit with the impressionists. He wanted to be an academic painter, but he does have a big influence on the artists that become known as the impressionists, and he gets influenced by them as well. This is a picture of him. And this is one of his first works to really deal with modern life. And as you can see here, it was rejected from the official Salon of 1862. And I really like the painting, but what the public didn't like about it and what the Academy didn't understand about it was how there was such a lack of focus. However, Whoops, sorry. Give me just 1 second. I just jumped way ahead of myself. Oh, goodness. It's just better if I do it manually. I'm not using my computer either, so it's just a little trickier. There we go. Okay. So this work of art is set in the Tuileries Gardens, which had only recently been given to the public. Prior to this, just a few years earlier, the Napoleon III of the Second Empire, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, had become the second emperor, and he had basically given a lot of the land that had been previously owned by the kings to the public. So the Tuileries Garden, which today is right by where the Louvre is now open to the public. It had only recently been open to the public at this point. And so you have this group of individuals who have gone in, who are now getting to access this space, and they're kind of milling around before a concert. It does look a little chaotic, but it's also much more realistic as to how people attend an event. They're milling around, they're talking to each other. It's not posed and planned. So that was Manet's intent, to give this sense more of the moment. So the public and the Academy, though, hated it. They thought it was aimless and pointless and didn't have any subject matter to it. And also, if you notice, you can really see the brushwork of the paint. So this was rejected. However, Baudelaire really appreciated this painting, and he referred to this as being a perfect example of his definition of modernity being the transient, the fleeting, the contingent. So Baudelaire and Manet were very much in line with each other. The following year, Baudelaire writes an essay because he's so bored with the official salon, and he writes this essay titled "The Painter of Modern Life." And in it, he emphasizes this idea that it's the responsibility of modern painters to paint of his or her own time. So he's really encouraging people to take a moment and to look around the world, to look in their own environment, and to depict that and to document it. Charles Baudelaire also emphasizes this fact that still the Academy is the most important thing, though, and he writes that everything revolves around this salon, the satisfaction of pride, reputation, fame, fortune, and the guarantee of bread and butter. So that, in a nutshell, is the importance of the salon. Not only are you going to get fame and fortune for having your works displayed there, but it's also your livelihood. So this leads us to the Salon of 1863, which has a big impact on how the 1874 exhibition comes about. Because in the Salon of 1863, there were a lot of submissions. There was over 5,000 submissions of works of art, and more than half of them were refused. So this was a huge deal, and this is actually the storehouse of all of the paintings that were rejected. And you have to keep in mind that not only were these not going to be shown, but they got stamped on the back with a big R. So you couldn't even, as an artist, you couldn't even really try to sell it on your own because it had this horrible stigma against it. And of course, the artists were really upset because they felt like the Academy was too strict, they felt like the rules were too strict, and this was really very much affecting their livelihood. So Emperor Napoleon ends up hearing this and gets, I think he's a little concerned. He doesn't want a revolution coming up. He wants to sort of appease the people. So he decides to offer another opportunity, of which he calls the Salon of the Refused. So the very first year of this is 1863. He offers this opportunity, Napoleon III offers this opportunity to have an alternate exhibition of all of those works that had been refused. Not all of the artists submitted their works. I think it was about 780 or so. A lot of the other artists didn't want the stigma. They just decided to accept the fact that they had been refused and move forward. And they didn't want the additional stigma of being in the refused salon. Plenty of them, though, did. And this ended up being a huge exhibition. It took place actually in the same location at the same time as the official salon. So it really set up this ability for the public to be able to kind of compare and contrast. And this is the first time in the history of French art, at least, where the public really had the opportunity to kind of make their own opinions, to sort of see the difference between works that were accepted and works that weren't. And I will be honest, most people went to make fun of this exhibit. But it was really very popular. I'm just going to show a close-up of these artists that are pouting before their paintings that have been refused. So this is, whoops, I went back in time. There we go. So these are just, it's the two catalogs side by side, but you have the Salon of the Refused and then the official salon. But it received about 1,000 visitors a day, which was very, very big. Another very lovely cartoon. This is, got this father and son going into the Salon des Refuses, and the caption says, "Show your respect and remove your cap for the failed attempt." And there's actually a quote about this, just about the fact that this was not set up to mock the individuals necessarily. This is a quote from an art critic that wrote that the exhibition of works rejected by the jury is receiving almost as many visitors as its neighbor. The misbegotten child is competing with the legitimate daughter of the gentleman of the Academy. The rooms are good, well lit, and the works of the pariahs of the salon can be examined in the best possible conditions. So it's emphasizing the fact that these were shown with respect. They were shown in the same way that the official works were. But as I mentioned, it still caused quite a scandal. And out of all of the works that got shown and were ridiculed the most is this work by Edward Manet. It's called The Luncheon on the Grass, or Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. We don't have time to quite get into all of the details of this, but what Manet is trying to do is he wants to paint modern life. So what his idea was, and it maybe was a little misguided, but his thought was, why don't I go back to the paintings of the past, the paintings that are revered in the Louvre, but are kind of dated, and why don't I update them? So the basis for his painting of 1863 was a Renaissance painting by Giorgione that was located in the Louvre. So this painting was, most of the public, was familiar with this painting, and it is a pastoral scene with two men dressed in contemporary clothes that are surrounded by two nude women. Obviously very logical. And that's really what Manet does. He just updates it. He sets it in one of the new parks. Again, just like the Garden of the Tuileries, this park had recently been opened up to the public, and so the public could hang out here, and the figures are dressed in contemporary clothes. It really is very much the same subject matter, just updated. However, of course, the public was not accepting of it. It doesn't have to do with the nudity, though, because this painting won the Medal of Honor and was then purchased by Napoleon III. This is The Birth of Venus. However, there is a difference with how the nude figures are depicted. In particular, the more academic style is she's very rounded, she looks more like a sculpture, there's a lack of intimate details. Also, it's called The Birth of Venus, which automatically identifies her as a mythological figure as opposed to a real woman, where this woman is sitting with men that are dressed in contemporary clothes, so kind of recognizable as being a contemporary figure. And she's also being quite direct with us. She's looking directly at us. And I am not joking about this. The public were very upset with how she looked and made fun of the rolls on her waist and the rolls in her neck and were very offended by being able to see the bottom of her foot. So those were the things that were upsetting. And then, not that she was nude, just that she wasn't the right kind of nude. And then, of course, there's other aspects also with, again, with Manet's painting style. You don't see all the definition of each and every leaf. It's kind of got a much more brush-like quality to it. That all being said, the Déjeuner sur l'herbe and Edward Manet was the most written about artist of that time period. It is one of the first examples of what we call a success to scandal, that he was so widely talked about that he kind of became almost like a folk hero to the younger generation of artists, because even though he wasn't getting good press, I mean, we all know the saying that there's no such thing as bad publicity, and that was exactly the case with this. So fast forward to 1865, they chose not to have a Salon des Refuses because it had been so popular, and I think it was going against the desire of the government-run academy, that they wanted to have more control. However, it's kind of interesting because they do accept works by Edward Manet. So I suspect that they wanted still to get a little bit of the attention. This is your example of one of the works that won top honors. It is a portrait of Napoleon III, so no wonder it was well received. But also, again, just a good example of that academic style. It's, it looks very realistic. You have all of this very ornate and intricate detail. You have that sense of space and depth as you look further down into the palace. It's also quite flattering of Napoleon III. And then Manet shows this. Another work that caused a huge amount of scandal. Also, though, another work that he is doing the same thing that he was doing before, trying to update a work of art. Because this was a very well-known work of art from the Italian Renaissance. This is Titian's Venus of Urbino. And it's very much, very literally referencing it. You have the same sort of red couch area, same white sheets, a reclining nude figure looking directly out of the canvas, other figures in the scene. The big issue, though, again, goes back to the same things before. It goes back to the title and to the way she looked, because in the Titian painting, she looks, again, rather sculptural. She's a little bit more demure. She's got her head sort of tilted down. And she's identified as Venus of Urbino. In reality, she was the Duke of Urbino's mistress. But slap the name Venus on it, and then she's a mythological figure. Manet titled this Olympia, and Olympia was a very common pseudonym for a working woman, a woman that worked in a brothel. So automatically, it was identified as a prostitute. Mind you, prostitution was legal and very, very common in Paris at this time period. But it wasn't something that you blatantly talked about. So again, this caused a big scandal. There's a few quotes. Baudelaire wrote about it that Manet wrote to his friend Baudelaire that insults rain down on me like hail. I have never seen such a to-do. And another art critic writes about it that specifically identifies how unfortunately this was being judged, and he refers to it as the scapegoat of the Salon, the victim of Parisian lynch law. Each passerby takes a stone and throws it at her face. Olympia is a very crazy piece of Spanish madness, which is 1,000 times better than the platitude and inertia of so many canvases on show in the exhibition. So this is written by Émile Zola, a realist writer, but also a big supporter of these artists. So he's saying that, yeah, maybe this is a little crazy, but it's still way better than the same repetition of works of art. So, again, though, Manet causes a scandal. This actually had to be moved at one point during the Salon because people were trying to attack it with umbrellas, so they had to move it kind of above where a staircase was. But again, Manet ends up being this figure that is talked about constantly in the press, not for positive things, but is still being written about in the press. This is the year, though, that there starts being some confusion, because that same year, there were 2 seascapes that were shown. And by this point in 1865, the Salon was still hanging those works from floor to ceiling, but they were also hanging paintings in alphabetical order, just to give some type of order to it. So there is the Olympia painting by Edward Manet, and then there was these 2 small seascapes also, and the press got confused. And in the press, there was, some references to, well, Manet really took a real sharp swing, and with his horrible Olympia, he also presented these beautiful seascapes. The seascapes were done by this young artist in his debut. It's works by Claude Monet. Manet was furious because Manet thought that this young, up-and-coming artist was just trying to steal his spotlight and had specifically manipulated the situation so he would get some of the talk. As it turns out, they will become friends, but this is Mouth of the Seine at Honfleur. This is located in the Norton Simon Museum now. And then this one is another painting of Le Havre, which is in Normandy, where Claude Monet is from. So these 2 were the premiere, the debut paintings of Claude Monet. He was 24 years of age at the time. And this is just a photograph of Claude Monet. So as I mentioned, he's from the seaside town. He was actually born in Paris, but spent most of his life in Le Havre, right by the sea. He loves the water. He'll consistently go back to the water. At the age of 16, he had stayed with his aunt in Paris and had been really introduced to the Louvre. And he started doing caricatures back at home. His father was a fairly successful merchant, ran a store, and of course his father assumed he was going to follow in line. But eventually he ends up going off to Paris and starts studying art. And eventually he'll find himself in the studio of this man. And I just want to show you the style of art that he was known for. Very, very academic. Here you've got the Dance of the Bacchanets. So it's a rather large painting, highly, highly realistic, very, very finished, dating back to mythological subject. And so Claude Monet is learning in a very traditional way. But fortunately, while he's there, he also meets a few other artists. And these other artists that he meets are all kind of a little bored with painting mythological scenes and still lifes and copying things. One of the main figures that he meets a couple different individuals, but the longest and closest friendship and colleague that he meets is Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And this is a painting of Monet by Renoir. So Renoir's another artist around the same age. Both of them had been financially struggling, trying to get accepted into the Salon, not having a ton of luck, but also getting really, really bored. So the 2 of them end up, really becoming friends. This is an example of Renoir's early works in the studio in a more academic style. But the 2 of them start deciding, I'm just really bored, I just want to paint. And so the 2 of them kind of follow in a tradition, and they start going out to the forest of Fontainebleau, which had been kind of a prominent area for a group of realist landscape artists who were painting influenced by outdoors, but then they would finish their paintings in the studio. But what Monet and Renoir start doing is they just go out. I did that again, sorry. They start going out to the forest and just painting what is there. And this is an actual painting. It looks like a photograph, but it's a painting outdoors that Renoir did. And they start finishing their paintings completely outdoors because they all of a sudden recognize how amazing the light is. And that if they're finishing the works in the studio, it didn't have the same sense of being there in that moment, and that you missed the lights and the shadow. So the two of this is another one by Renoir. This is Claude Monet, and this is all around 1865, shortly after they'd met. But the two of them consistently start going out there and really start getting a feel for just trying to paint the light and the accuracy of that. Oops, I did that again. Sorry about that. And they'll continue doing this, but they're submitting works and they're not getting accepted, submitting works and not getting accepted. This is one work that Claude Monet starts working on, trying to sort of do an homage to Edward Manet. By this time period, they're friends. But Monet and Renoir both are struggling. Claude Monet has one bit of success with this painting. In 1866, it's accepted to the Salon, but it probably doesn't look very recognizable as a Claude Monet painting. You've got that dark background. It's really focused on fashion. The following year, he gets rejected again. This is his Women in the Garden. And this is what he wanted to do. Claude Monet takes a model, it's actually all the same model who will eventually be his wife, but paints her as opposed to in that dark interior focusing on the costume. He instead sets her outside, always in a white dress because white reflects the light, and tries to capture her in these different moments in in the midst of shade and light, and you have that, the shadowy effect. This was rejected though, and it was rejected on the grounds that it had narrative weakness, which it doesn't really have a story to it. It's just about the beauty of the light and the reflection. But also the jury was upset and troubled by the brushwork, the very visual brushwork. And one of the judges commented that too many young people think of nothing but continuing in this abominable direction. It is high time to protect them and save art. So it was very offensive to them, to the jury. And then we've got 1868 is another year that Monet submitted two works with only one of them being accepted. And it's just another little seascape. But the other one was rejected. And I apologize, the format got a little bit odd, but the following year in Salon of 1869 is when Claude Monet is starting to get really upset. He's been consistently refused. He had a little bit of success in 65 and 66. By 69, he is not quite married yet, but does have a child. He's trying to support his girlfriend and his child, and he's constantly being rejected, so he's not making any money. And he writes that this rejection has taken the bread from my mouth, and in spite of my low prices, collectors and dealers turn their backs on me. Claude Monet was not good with money either, by the way. But this is one of his works. This one's called The Magpie. This was another one that was refused from the Salon of 1869. And it is one of his larger snowscapes. But really what the public was concerned with was actually the incredible, innovative, scientific approach that Claude Monet was taking, because one of the elements with this is, I think conceptually, when we think of a shadow, we think shadows are black. The reality is that they're not. Black doesn't really exist. The reflections, especially the shadows on the snow, it's a series of dark blues and purples and lavenders, and that's what he's trying to capture. And this was something, there were very recent discoveries and theories of how the eye interprets color. So he was taking a very, very both scientific approach, but also what he's doing is he is really looking at what he's painting. It's referred to as local color, but he's looking at something, painting outdoors and trying to really capture the true reality of it as opposed to the conception of it. Again, though, the public didn't like it. They thought it was just too colorful and not realistic enough and too broad of strokes. Regardless, it was refused. And it was, I've just got some close-ups of it. It's now in the Musée d'Orsay. And one of the interesting things about it, it's the one on the right-hand side. It's actually one of his larger snowscapes. But also, according to the Musée d'Orsay, it is believed to be based off of the amount of postcards that they sell and different reproductions of it. The Musée d'Orsay considers this to be their most popular single image in the entire museum. So quite a switch in the appreciation of it. So we're still moving forward. The next year, actually later that same year, Claude Monet and Renoir take another trip. And this time they go along the Seine, but out in the countryside. And again, the two of them, just like they did in Fontainebleau, they are setting up their easels and they're painting this kind of vacation resort area, but they're painting side by side. And they're painting completely out of doors. And what they're trying to do, though, is capture the light, capture the moment. Again, keep in mind that this is after photography has been invented. So the idea of just painting something as it realistically looks can now be captured by film. But what can't be captured is the light and the colors and a sense of movement and the spontaneity or the capturing that moment in time. So Renoir and Monet are trying to do that. You have to paint kind of quickly, though, to do that. So that's what they're doing here. They both worked on these paintings completely out of doors, and then they both submitted examples to the Salon the following year. And guess what? They were all refused. He also submitted this work as well to the 1870 Salon, and it was also rejected. So now this has been, since 1866, he's been rejected consistently every year. The next year, there is no official salon because we have the Franco-Prussian War, and that's about 2 years where it's just chaos. Claude Monet actually spends that time in London and in the Netherlands. But around 1870, prior to the Franco-Prussian War, there had been some discussion between Claude Monet and Renoir and a few of their other friends that they were getting so fed up with, fighting with the Salon and being rejected that they were considering forming a group. It had to be put on hold because of the Franco-Prussian War, but they eventually revisit the idea in December of 1873. And in December of 1873 is when they found the very catchy Société Anonyme Coopérative des Artistes, Painters, Sculptors, Graveurs. My French isn't great, but basically the anonymous cooperation of artists, painters, sculptors, and engravers. Not very catchy, but that is what they found. They founded this group, and it was actually a larger group. There was kind of a core group of artists that were friends, but they recognized that they needed more money, so they all kind of pooled their money. There was a very nominal fee, a yearly membership fee, that they got from all of the individuals. And this was specifically with the intention that following years and years of rejection, that they wanted to fund their own society and fund their own exhibitions. And so that's what they did. This is actually the newspaper article talking about it, announcing the group's bylaws. So they each paid kind of a membership due. They did also part of the rule was that as long as you paid your money, you could show as many works as you wanted to. You were not allowed to submit works to the official salon, though. So this really was a rebellion. They were consciously setting it up to be set up against the official salon. Some of the original members, probably some of their names will sound familiar. We've already talked about Claude Monet and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Also, some of the main figures, the core figures, are Camille Pissarro, Alfred Sisley, Paul Cézanne, Bert Morisot, and Edgar Degas. Those are kind of the main figures that we're associated with. So this is what leads us to this first exhibition. As I mentioned, it was held at Nadar's studio. There was no jury because it was just based on the funds or the membership fee. They had that democratic hanging. Also, the hanging department led by Renoir insisted that all of the frames be very plain so that nobody was like jumping out, that it was all the works could kind of be seen in with the same sort of intent. All of the walls were kind of plain as well. We already talked about that. So it opened 2 weeks before the official salon, as I mentioned. They got some viewership, but quite a bit less than the official salon, and they did not make any money. They were completely in the red. They also didn't get a huge amount of attention. There's something like, I believe the number is about they got 61 notices in the newspaper, just in general. Some of those just being basic references to the fact that this is going on. Out of any of the notices, the majority of them were negative. Some of them were kind of neutral, and some of them were very supportive, but for the most part, the public didn't understand, and they didn't like what they saw. And I'm just going to show you a sampling of them. So, it's hard to find some of these offensive, but this is one of Renoir's work. Renoir showed 7 paintings. And this one actually did get some positive attention. One of the reviews said that the dancer is true to life and has a fine and nervous elegance in its truth. Not exactly the nicest comment, but oops. And then he showed 7 works. That's a close-up. This one did not receive very good reviews. It was described as a failure. However, it is one of the only paintings that actually sold from the exhibition. Oh, also, they were all pooling their money, so any of the sales, it was a little bit, I guess, a little socialist, but any of the money that they made, they split between all of them. This is another work by Renoir. Edgar Degas is another major figure, because I think one thing to keep in mind is that this group, they were not specifically setting this up to start a whole new school of art. It wasn't, all of the artists had their own styles, had their own intentions. What they really shared was that they wanted to really go against the academy. They wanted to go against the government-run system. They were all independent artists. They were just working together largely out of financial necessity because they had to pool their money. There's going to be a lot of infighting with this group, largely due to Edgar Degas here. But he's one of the original founders. His style is quite a bit different from the Impressionists because he actually hated painting out of doors. Most of Impressionism is kind of associated with the light and changing light and the seasons, but Degas actually had a serious eye issues, so it actually hurt him to paint outside. He also will hate the term Impressionism. And that's another figure of him. But in a lot of ways, some of his paintings really do fit in to this kind of idea of capturing modernity and capturing a specific moment in time. Sorry again about the formatting, but this is called At the Races in the Countryside, one of 10 works that he showed. Degas is really known for being influenced by photography. So here you really have kind of this, it's like a candid shot. technically it's a painting of a racetrack, but the racehorses are way in the background. Instead, we have this off-center kind of asymmetrical point of view. And it's really a depiction of, this family. It's a family, a well-to-do family that have come to enjoy the day at the races, and there's a mother breastfeeding. Then you've got the horses in the background. He also became really interested in capturing working women of the day, especially these, what actually became a very, very big industry, which was laundry in Paris at the time. But he started depicting these women that were not women that were necessarily always in the public, but were a thriving part of the economy, and depicting them in a very realistic way. You've got these workers, they had to work usually in kind of basement areas, and so it was hot, it was steamy. It's kind of a long quote, but this is from an art critic, and he writes, "Yesterday I spent the whole day in the studio of a strange painter called Degas. He's fallen in love with modern life, and out of all of the subjects in modern life, he has chosen washerwomen and ballet dancers. When you come to think of it, it's not a bad choice. It's a world of pink and white, of female flesh in lawn and gauze. He showed me washerwomen and still more washerwomen, speaking their language and explaining the technicalities of the different movements in pressing and ironing." Of course, what Degas is most known for is ballet dancers. This is one of his first depictions of a dance class. And I also just want to point this out, that he's always associated with ballet dancers. He rarely paints them when they're on stage. And if he does paint them while they're on stage, it's usually from kind of a backstage vantage point. Because what he's more interested in is the reality of the situation. So he paints the rehearsals. He paints women who are, you've got this one girl who looks rather graceful in her position, but then you also have those ballet dancers behind her that are stretching and looking rather stressed. And over here, one girl adjusting her shoe. So it's really the backstage scenes. He's capturing the reality of movement and really the truth of it, instead of the perfection that we see on stage. This is another one. This is also, they're on stage, but it's still a rehearsal scene. One of the other leading figures from the very get-go is Berthe Morisot, and she honestly deserves a lot more attention. She's starting to get more attention. But out of all of the artists, I think undeniably Claude Monet is the most well-known of the Impressionists. He only exhibits in four of the 8 exhibitions. Renoir only exhibits in 3 of the 8 exhibitions. Berthe Morisot exhibits in 7 of the 8, and she missed one because she was having her child. So she helps to really run and organize it also. There's a connection because she gets married to Edward Manet's younger brother. But she had had success at the official salon. This is what she showed in 1865. But she also felt hindered by the Academy. She felt like there were these expectations. And so she ended up starting to exhibit with this, rebellious group of artists. This is one of them. And this is actually one of my favorites. It's called, in fairness, she did oftentimes depict a lot of scenes of family members and children. Because of her role, she was from a very well-to-do family, so there was a lot of restrictions at the time in French society that she wasn't allowed to go to cafes by herself unchaperoned. So she does focus a little bit on the domestic space, but she also incorporates a lot of, I think, emotion, and there's this real soft brush-like quality with her painting. This is a review of her work, this is a review of the exhibition from a man named Albert Wolff, who is not a fan. He wrote that the group consisted of 5 or 6 lunatics, of which one is a woman, whose feminine grace is maintained amid an outpourings of a delirious mind. She looks very delirious, doesn't she? Camille Pissarro is not one of the more well-known artists of the group, but he's actually the only artist that exhibits in all 8 of the Impressionist exhibitions, really associated with landscapes. This is his debut at the official salon, but then, like all the other artists, he consistently got rejected. A quote from him that the critics are eating us alive about the 1874 exhibit. And he exhibited 5 landscapes. So these are all works that were shown in that very first show. And then his kind of counterpart is a man named Alfred Sisley, who also showed 5 landscapes at the first Impressionist exhibition. And that's a photograph of him. He'll only exhibit in a few of them, and he moves back to London for a while. But these are his examples that were there. And then we come back to Claude Monet. So Claude Monet, this is the luncheon which he had originally submitted to the Salon of 1870, was rejected. He shows it again here. He also shows this work. He shows a total of 9 works. This is Poppy Fields near Argenteuil. So this is his wife and son in this field of poppies. Something that you'll notice about Claude Monet is that even if he does have people in his compositions, they're not the focus. They're an addition, but always the focus is the light, the atmosphere. This is another one of the paintings that he showed in the first exhibition, another one of Le Havre. This one's actually also in the LA County Museum of Art. They just got donated. However, the pinnacle painting that he showed is the cause of the name of the group, because another painting that he showed that he'd painted while he was in Le Havre is this one, and he titled it Impression Sunrise. I'll talk about the museum that it's in just a moment. But this is an actual photograph of the port of Le Havre. So this is part of a series of paintings that he had done. He had gone back home to visit. He rented a hotel room. And for a few months, he just was painting. He would take his easel and his canvas and his paints outside and paint early in the morning of this industrial harbor. This was the largest harbor in France at the time. So as you can imagine, early in the morning, actually kind of like it was today, really, really hazy, can't see things clearly, it's early in the morning. You know, that first glimpse, you can't really see everything. You're gonna be affected by all of the haze, the sun coming up. Also, you've got the smokestacks in the background that are impacting what you see. So he tried to paint as quickly and as accurately that specific moment. However, it was quite different from what people expected. You could see the brushwork, you could see, you could barely make out anything. That was another big problem. So there was an art critic named Louis Leroy, and he publishes in April 25th of 1874, just a few days after the opening, he publishes this review that he titles Exhibition of the Impressionists. He took that title specifically from this painting, Impression Sunrise. And he went on to write this scathing review. How he set it up, he was trying to be satirical. He set it up as though it was a sort of dialogue between a much more traditional painter and a friend. So it's this kind of conversation back and forth. When he came to talking about Impression Sunrise, this is part of the review, Leroy wrote, Impression Sunrise, what is this painting of? Look in the catalog. Impression Sunrise. Impression? I knew it. I was just saying to myself, if I'm impressed, there must be an impression in there. And what freedom, what ease in the brushwork. Wallpaper in its embryonic state is more finished than this seascape. So he's basically saying it's not anything, it's just an impression of something, it's not an actual image of anything. The funny thing is that this stuck. As I mentioned, they called themselves the Anonymous Cooperation of Painters, Engravers, and Sculptors. This term Impressionists immediately stuck. And I'm just gonna I'll go back to this in just a second. But this is one of the cartoons that came out. It's a caricature. And in this caricature, they've already adapted that name, exposition of the Impressionists. The Impressionists themselves, although they accept that name begrudgingly eventually, it's not going to be until the third exhibit that they show together that they'll actually even accept it. And they just sort of gave up because they hated the name because it was a mockery, but it got so widely appreciated and kind of appropriated by them. So this is a lovely cartoon that has these individuals, these gentlemen running away scared from the paintings. I mentioned this painting now is in the Musée Marmottan Monet, which is located kind of in the outskirts a little bit of Paris. It's a great collection, though, that has the largest collection of Monet paintings. It was all given by Monet's only surviving heir, his youngest son. And I'll just go ahead and wrap it up with, this is an interview that Monet did later on as a reference to this specific exhibition. And he writes, "A landscape is only an impression, instantaneous, hence the label they've given us, all because of me for that matter. I'd submitted something done out of my window at Le Havre, sunlight in the mist with a few masts in the foreground, jutting up from the ships below. They wanted a title for the catalog. It couldn't really pass as a view of Le Havre, so I answered, put down impression. Out of that they got Impressionism and the jokes proliferated." So that is where the group gets its name. As I mentioned, they're not really considered, it's not a unified school. It was really a group of rebels that were just sort of holding on to this idea that they wanted to give themselves an opportunity to exhibit. They are all influenced by the style of realism. They're painting what they are actually looking at, but there's kind of a varying degree as to how interested they are in painting out of doors, looking at the different effects of light. As a group, though, as I mentioned, there'll be a total of 8 Impressionist exhibitions, starting with the first one in 1874, but every year the main players sort of varied. Renoir and Sicily will leave by the 3rd exhibition because they want the success. They want to start submitting at the Academy. And slowly and gradually, the style will catch on. By the 1890s, Claude Monet will start making money, but it takes a long time. And gradually it becomes widely popular. But it really took quite a bit of time, and they were just completely reviled at the beginning. Are there any questions? No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to go ahead and put my email address back up in case you have any questions or comments outside of class.
I want to thank Katherine for a most interesting presentation. Yes, indeed. We're running a little short.